Hi, this is Sue Greenwald with Awakened Stories today, here with Deanna Carr from the Mystical Moonlight. Hi, Deanna, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Awesome. Today's topic is the Salem Witch Trials. Okay, we've gotten a lot of comments and questions about that. People want to know more. So I thought we'd do just a little bit of an overview and you can tell us what, really happened. Okay.
All right, got it.
So the witch trials we're talking about specifically handled in 1692 and 3, okay, up in Massachusetts, part of
Hmm.
the US. But interesting enough, they were about 30 plus years after some other witch trials here in the US that are not well known about. Is specifically Connecticut. There were two spots in Connecticut where they had like hysteria and they basically hung or burned quite a few people. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm going to go through the list of things I want to talk about. You stop me when we need to make a point. So back then in the 1600s, of course, they were very primitive according to the way we think of them. They were very, very religious, and it had to be there. They had deeply ingrained beliefs. The politics was there was a lot of division over property lines at that point, and
Yeah.
there was a lot of hardship in their lives, illnesses, injury, Native Americans taking their land, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there was a lot of witchcraft, trials in Europe before all of this happened. So that was kind of like a precursor. So what happened is that a couple of young girls started to get hysterical and have visions, dreams, and screaming, contorting, and talking gibberish, basically. And so the local doctor diagnoses them as bewitched. And then these two young girls, they were probably 8, 9, 10, identify other women in the town that they felt were witches. So it sounds to me like that was done under duress. Okay. So then these women are put in a jail, blah, blah, blah. And then the governor gets involved. And I'm glossing over a lot of detail here.
Yeah.
Governor comes along and says, "Oh, we're going to make a committee to study what's happening here and make sure it's fair, right?" All right,
Yeah.
big red flag for me there.
Well, I
Um,
mean, the whole thing is red flags all over the place. Like
yeah,
the whole trial is red flags.
yeah.
Now, I'm sorry, I'm just going to cut in really
No, you
quickly.
got to.
Um, so part of it, you talk about property lines, right? Property is actually a huge part of this. So we're not even getting in to get the spiritual stuff at all. But a big part of it is the property lines. Most of the women that were burned were women that had access to large sums of land because the husband they would be widows, they would be something that like had access to a lot of land. So if they got rid of that person, who has that land? Who does that land go to? So it is a way for them to get lands back. That's why you're going to see it mostly in specific areas versus across the country. Because if it really was about the witches, it would be a thing everywhere, right? And not just specific locations. The other thing about it is it's only targeted to women. Like for some reason, men couldn't practice that. No way, right? It's only women.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that in there.
Oh, no. I actually saw a video about a week or two about a guy speaking about this very topic who said it was basically a land grab. He said
Hmm.
the exact same thing you did, didn't want to influence what you said, but it's interesting how they are all women and many were, again, they say they were destitute, a couple of them, but they were usually widows or women
Hmm.
who didn't have family, so they couldn't protect themselves, right?
Yes, yes.
And who really knows the status of their economics, 300 or 400 years later, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and lands was like you said, it's a big thing.
Yeah.
And if there's nobody that's going to own the lands, because usually men in that time frame were the owners, women were just there. Now, horrible sexism, obviously, but that is how they get around getting more land. Now it's a horrendous way. but they were able to get a lot of land due to this
Right.
technique.
Right. Right. Okay, so it's interesting too. They take two little girls, like two, little kids are easily influenced. Okay. You can tell them
Oh
something,
yeah.
whatever. They're influenced. They believe you.
Mm,
So these two girls start talking gibberish. The doctor examines them and says, "Oh, they're going through some," they called it spectral evidence or something like that. It's like their visions or dreams. And they
mhm,
ruled that that was admissible in their court, right? So you
mhm.
could say something and no one would say, well, where's the proof, right?
Yeah.
These two young girls basically started a lot of hysteria in the town.
Mhm.
So what
Yeah.
happens is two or three get accused, and then other people start joining in, and lots were accused. They endured, again, they had to confess under duress. Okay, so they were probably starved, is my guess, and maybe, maybe tortured. Who knows exactly what happened to them, but it
They were
wasn't.
mostly tortured.
Yeah.
They would put him in, and I mean, that's why there are laws now, not that everybody follows them, but there are laws now that, you have to treat them accordingly because you can't starve them out. You can't force them into saying something that's untrue. So most of these women were forced to say it because one, after a certain point of time, you kind of just give up. You're like, they're like, I'm just going to keep going through this. And then two, like what are their other options? Like nobody's coming to save them. So what are their choices? So that's why a lot of them would, you know, say that they were, witches, or they would be, going on trial, which their trials were horrendous in the sense of what they did to see if they were actually witches. Like logically, somebody had to say like this is stupid, but I guess they didn't.
Yeah. So basically, in about 6 months, these little girls influenced other people in town, and they were all accusing each other. Okay, that's
Hmm.
what it sounds like when you read the history. So they
Yeah.
actually hanged 19 people at that
Hmm.
in 6 months later. So it was probably in the June, I'm going to say 1692 time frame. And then again, prominently woman, but one guy they pressed to death. And uh, I don't know why I'm able to see that field where that happened. I don't know why that is, but how horrible. But then many died in jail while awaiting their trials. So again, probably tortured and starved is my guess.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that the courts heavily relied upon this, we'll call it spectral evidence. That's the visions and the other stuff that other people came up with. And then after a while, doubts began to emerge about whether that was a valid, thing that they could, a valid evidence for court. And they begin
Yeah.
questioning that. So then the governor steps in again and says, well, probably need a different committee, like, oh, and then they all start to backpedal a little bit, right? Because a lot
Yeah.
of attention is getting on them. So after all of that, many of the accusers retracted their statements. Um, one of the judge says, "Oh, sorry, I made a mistake," and
Yeah.
they
Easy.
give,
Let me just get off of it.
yeah, and there was nothing that happened to them that caused death of like 20 plus people. And some
Hmm.
of the families were paid compensation. Does that sound right? Like, does that sound like what the truthful story was?
No, they didn't get compensated. They said they were going to get compensated, but
Ah,
really, they did not.
yeah.
They were very grimy people. I mean, who does that thing to begin with?
Right.
So why would they then compensate the family for all the trauma they put them through? Um, and they put this hysteria in about witches. Now, I'm not saying witchcraft is not a real thing. I mean, there are good and bad witches, but they're all natural usually. Like, for the most part, good witches are using herbs and medicine. Like most of us actually practice pieces of witchcrafts without even really realizing it. It's like you might not have the education, but some of it has been passed on. You would just be considered like a green witch. Like if you use tea, if you use herbal supplements, if you use nature in some way to heal, that is what witchcraft is. We just use it in a different term, like holistic. So there's different ways we use it now, But back then, it was if you didn't do what was like normalized. And this also goes into, talking about big pharma because we have to think about when did big pharma start coming into play? And if you start thinking about how they're putting a bad idea about using natural medicine at an early stage, it's easier for them to start to incorporate the fake medicines and having people think that is the right way because they have this idea that, natural is going to make you a witch and you're a horrible person. You're going to do all this nasty stuff. So it's kind of a setup for multiple things that come along later on.
Yeah. And a lot of that's done on purpose. For example, the
Hmm.
maligned chiropractors, okay? And those
Hmm.
most chiropractors use they promote natural healing and health, okay, to prevent illness. They've maligned
Hmm.
them because they want the medical doctors, to have the authority,
Hmm.
and all they do is hand out prescriptions and drugs, right?
Yep.
So they
Yep.
want that. All right. So they've maligned people that use natural healing techniques. All right.
Yes.
In this case, this was a lot of hysteria. Like, so and so doesn't do something. I'm going to accuse them. They go to jail. They're tortured. They're starved. Whether they're innocent or not is irrelevant.
Hmm.
So there was,
Yeah, because it's just one person that says something, and yep, you're right, they are,
yeah,
and it's horrible because they've caused a lot of pain.
right.
They've caused a lot of issues within the space itself. I mean, if you really think about it, if you think about Salem itself, a lot of people go there because of witches. Now, the interesting part is, I mean, I haven't been there, but a lot of people say they go there and you could go to every corner and there is a witchcraft store around every block. So it's just interesting how now there that space is used to
Yeah,
promote,
yeah,
witchcraft.
yeah,
Now, before it was used to torture and kill. So I just find it interesting now they're using it kind of as a money grab. Like
yeah,
that's how I see it. I haven't been there personally,
yeah.
but that's how I perceive that.
Yeah, they're basically capitalizing on the negative reputation, and I don't know
Hmm.
really why people would want to go, like they have witchcraft museum and all that. Like, do you really want to see that where people were tortured and
Hmm.
were any of these women that were killed, were any of them evil or dark?
No.
Okay. Do you really want to see where these women mostly were tortured and killed? Like, that's not right. It's not right.
No, it's not. And then, like I said, they're using it in a way to like try to say like, oh, witchcraft is not a bad thing, and they're trying to change the perspective. But you got to think about, we talked about this before when
Mm,
somebody dies early on,
yeah,
their souls are pretty much trapped. And when they're killed in horrific ways, their souls are going to be upset and not settled. So now you're bringing more tourists to this area that you have unsettled souls. So there's a lot of kind of drama. And like you said, this is not the only location. There are a lot of locations
right.
that did practice, witchcraft trials and all that. But Salem is usually the first one people think about because it's horrendous.
Yeah.
Now, the other part about this actually goes back to England. So um, when you think about, okay, we're going to take a huge jump. When you think about how America was created, we brought books over from England, and most of the books were written by men and mostly religious, right? So we talked about that, how, witchcraft would go against the religion. And it kind of sets America up for this religious aspect. And it helped people to say you are witches because it didn't go along with my religion. Whereas if they didn't have these books, I don't think witchcraft would have been as serious as it would. They might not even know what it was. They kind of grabbed things out of these books and used it against them. So it's interesting how, history from a different location influenced the history in a new location.
Okay. When you say books, are you talking witchcraft books?
No, Bible.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So basically, okay. So they influenced them, all right,
Hmm.
that they would basically have the same religion in America. Like we're taught that America was founded. Okay, this is what we're taught on religious freedom. So they wanted freedom from religious
Hmm.
persecution. But what you're really saying is they wanted us all to be the same as England. Like we were supposed to believe the same stuff that England had, since we were being controlled by them at that point. And I say
Yeah.
we just because we're in the US.
Yeah. So yeah, so they use it as a way to kind of spread their ideology
Right.
throughout a new nation. And you got to think it worked.
It didn't work.
I mean, it worked.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
works. What else can
Mhm.
I say? I can't really say anything else but that. But no, the witchcraft trials was a horrendous thing. Most of them were not even witches. Most of them were just innocent people. Like you said, people would just say like, "Hey, you did me dirty," or "I didn't like how you looked at me," or "You didn't, do what I wanted."
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say you did that, and it was either blackmail, so they would do what they wanted,
Right.
or they wouldn't, and they were prosecuted.
Crazy. So it just shows you examples of mass hysteria and also, the religious extremism that we kind of just talked about, but the
Hmm.
breakdown of due process with the court system. Like they had these random
Hmm.
guys making up their own laws. They were assigned a group or geez, I might my brain just went blank. They're assigned a committee to decide the fate of these people. And they didn't even look at evidence, is really what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most
So,
of the evidence, like you said, was falsified.
right.
Like people retracting their accusations,
Yeah.
and then now people get visions. I'm not gonna say we don't, but it's hard to prove that somebody had a vision
Yeah.
like what they were saying. Like you could say something that's going to happen in the future and you got to kind of wait and like, oh, it happens, you're right. But for me to say like, oh, blah blah blah, and that's exactly what happened, and I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. There was no any actual evidence like, oh, this actually happened. Um, Waiting for it to actually happen, anything like that, just is wrong in its sense. Because like I said, we all have this gift of foresight. It's just how do you prove it? And there are ways to, but they weren't doing that. They were just like, oh, okay, I believe you.
Well, because they had an agenda. But
Oh,
like
yeah.
look at it this way, these young girls were basically forced to accuse people initially, and people believed them. They wanted to
Yeah.
believe them because of they had an agenda, right? They wanted
Hmm.
land or whatever. They wanted control, they wanted revenge, whatever it was, sensationalism, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Like I said, we had in Connecticut, in Hartford, and there was another town, and I'm blanking right now. Prior to Salem, there were two or three instances, and they had many more people. The same kind of a situation there. So we didn't learn
Hmm.
from the first round or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
when we go to Europe, Germany had so many that they basically killed and tortured for witchcraft. England, Scotland had thousands. So this is not an isolated thing. It's a
Hmm.
just another way you can get revenge against people, I guess. Right?
Yep. And like I said, it's as part of that religious standpoint, like if somebody was a little bit different, because we talk about nowadays it's like you're spiritual or you're religious. There is a difference. But these people that they were, kind of killing off were more on the spiritual sense. They weren't, religious like that. They might have had different practices, but they were like, if you're not doing what we're doing, X nay you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, we say that America is all about religious freedom, but is it really? Right? Even now, people are persecuted for their skin color, their sex, their beliefs, whatever it might be, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
they all sorts of things happen to people that think differently or want to break out of the box of what we're taught, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Very
Anything
sad.
else we should know? I guess we'll say specifically about Salem, the witch trials, what happened, the innocence level, whatever happened to the judges, like, do we need to know any of that?
For people that were part of it, um, they had a different type of consequence because in life they were not really prosecuted. Everybody kind of got off. Let's say in the afterlife, they have been on a different path. So pretty much their next round of life, whatever they did to somebody was going to come back tenfold. So
Oh,
they did have their consequence, just not in that lifetime.
so like instant karma is going to get them, or like
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
not instant, but karma will get them.
Like karmic debt.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Awful. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna tell a little story because that's what I usually do. So it's always about me, right?
Yep,
So
always you.
about 8 years ago or so, I woke up with an out of a dream, and I was like, "Oh, I've got to go to Salem." And I knew that 5 people had to go with me, and I was very afraid to go. Very afraid
Hmm.
to go. And I never actually did go, but I called the 5 people. I said, "Are you guys going to go with me? Because I'm not going alone. We've got to go." We had to do some healing work there, whether it be ourselves or whatever there. So I rounded up the group, and then I said, "I'll make the reservations." So I start looking up hotels, and no lie, no lie. I have a vision of like thatched huts in my mind, mud paths, woods, and all that. And when I look it up, it's a modern city, okay, with hotels. And I
Yeah.
am like, I couldn't wrap my head around that. So I think I was in that proximity way back when. I don't know what capacity, probably don't want to know, but that was a real thing. I had real fear. And I did
Yeah.
procrastinate about planning the trip and never ended up going still.
Yeah, that's it's interesting because I remember that time frame because I actually wanted to go. Like, I knew it wasn't going to be a great trip in the sense of, feeling the energy, but I was actually drawn to Salem for a while. And still there are things about it that I'm drawn to. But it is part of our past lives. A lot of us actually have, had that in a past life where we were on trial. And that's probably what you were bringing up was that past life remembrance and your body was having a physical reaction with the fear-based aspect to it. um we always kind of forget that past lives can kind of reflect in our present life, and it causes fear. It can cause any type of emotion,
Right,
but usually it didn't end in a good way if you have a constant fear
right,
of it.
right.
Yeah.
There was intense fear, and like I said, I procrastinated. When I looked online, I realized I had been waiting for a thatched hut. And when I saw a modern city, it flipped me out, and I couldn't even make a decision. And as time went on, it died down, and I still haven't gone. And maybe with luck, I'll never go.
Yeah. So I think it's more, especially with the idea of it being, because I do think of that too. Like that's the last time you saw it.
Yeah.
That's what you're remembering. And then, it is more modernized now, so it is kind of interesting. Like they have hotels, they have houses, but in most people's thought process, when you think Salem, you do think of witch trials, you think of what it would look like with like haystacks around, people were had horses, like you have that idea of bringing you back to that time frame.
Right, right. Like I said earlier, I can see the place where the man was pressed. I can see it. And
Hmm.
I don't know why that is, and I'm not going deeper into that, okay? But
You probably were there.
yeah, not cool. Not cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anything else we should know about, the mass hysteria, the accusations, the history part, the religion?
Um, Not that I can think of. I think we covered most of it, but if people have questions, always put it in the comments.
Right.
Yeah.
So like we were saying, this is not an isolated experience. This happened all over the world, even in
Hmm.
the US multiple times, but we only think of Salem. It's the most famous one for some reason. So,
It's the most, I don't know why it's the most famous. Like you said, it's not even the biggest one. I think what it was is it's closer to our time frame.
yeah,
So if the ones previous were 30 years beforehand, you're not going to think of them. You're going to think of the one that's closer to the time frame because it wasn't that long ago.
right. And yeah, and
Hmm.
all of them had more people that were killed than Salem, but yeah, we
Hmm.
think of the one that we're familiar with. And
Yeah.
again, so I've always suspected those people were not guilty, and I haven't
Hmm.
thought about it much since then, but people were asking, so here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have any further questions, let us know, or any thoughts, put them in the comments and we'll get back to them during our next Q&A, right? Thanks so
Yes.
much, Deanna. I appreciate your time.
Of course. Bye.
Bye-bye.